Hey Legacy community, it's a Terra Master, and welcome to a interesting, unique, and dare I say, special video. And that's because, first off, let me introduce the guest here. That's Curseof YGO. What's up, dude?
I'm always happy to be a guest on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy channel.
That's right. Everyone should be. Anyway, we're here today to actually do something that I've never done before, and I don't know if you've done it before, but we're gonna actually explain, like, drill down to the very basics. So it's gonna be focused on speed duels and speed duels example, like you already see on your screen right now. I'm just showing you a deck right away, so you have something to look at while I rant. And we're gonna show you these decks, and we're gonna explain what each deck does, and really the point here is to identify your win condition with whatever deck you're using. And once you identify your win condition, the basic concept is you know how to build your deck and what cards your deck should contain. You'll know the core of your deck, and you'll know what staples fit best into the deck. And you'll also know how to fill out the rest of your deck, whether that's the rest of the main deck or even the side deck, in order to address your weaknesses. Because once you know how your deck wants to win, you obviously know how your opponent can stop it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that both me and you have seen the community struggle to do a lot. Going back to Jinzo format particularly, we've seen a lot of conflict decks not max out on their copies of Jinzo when their win condition was an OTK strategy, and that's just a huge example of not properly identifying your win condition and not building your deck around it accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is when we first kind of started having this conversation of there's too many non-optimized decks that are being entered into big-time competitive tournaments. And we've seen that the problem hasn't really gone away. Like, as we look at a lot of tournament deck lists, like even some of the top deck lists, like to us, it feels like there's still a lot of like potential there that's really untapped, and there's a lot of like very simple things that could be changed in just like the deck building that would really help those decks be even that much better, and they could have even gone further than they did. So that's why we decided to do this video. And I actually want to start with one that bothers me most, and that's inner conflict decks. And that's because look at this deck, this beautiful first place deck from, shout out to Paulo Arenati, I think also known as Justice on Discord. Just Justice, not JDG Justice. That's a different guy. He won Tetra's Battle City Box December tournament, first place. Okay, and look at what he's trying to do here. He's got 4 Monarchs, a little bit of diversity in there. Kaiser Glider, which is arguably the best one right now. Jinzo, which is still really good, because as you can see, people are still on Zoma, including him. People are still on Dust Tornado as well, and then there's also some people that are on things like Widespread Ruin, so there are traps that are still around the format, so Jinzo is still a good Monarch to have. And then he chose to go with Dark Ruler Hadez. Now this one, I'm not really sure as to what he's trying to get rid of, but it might be Apprentice Magician, because there's a lot of Apprentice conflict running around, and that brings me to my problem. And the problem is that there is a lot of Apprentice conflict running around. Now, what does Apprentice Magician do? It floats. What's the playstyle, Cursive, of a deck that plays Apprentice Magician?
It's a very control and stall heavy deck here, which is not what a conflict deck is trying to go for.
Exactly. It's like you mentioned at the beginning of the video, the conflict win condition when it was the dominant deck before Battle City Box, Conflict Jinzo, was to summon your Jinzo and another monster, which was at least 1600, and get that 4000 damage in. It's the same thing now. It hasn't really changed that much, as you can see proof in Paulo winning this tournament. He's got 3 Gaia, which counters the new staple Book of Moon beautifully, and it's still got the most powerful normal summon, 1900, ties with Voice Raider, but it's better because it counters Book of Moon. You've got Breaker, which pops back row, so it makes it less likely that your opponent can block your OTK if Breaker is one of your 2 monsters, and that's it. Other than that, he's just got Monarchs. That's And that's exactly what I was talking about when I said the core of the deck, right? Now, what about the rest of it?
Going into the rest of the deck, obviously, he has a lot of staples, which are going to be something that you're going to see common amongst multiple decks here. We have Sphere Karibo, which is a huge staple, as it is a monster effect that can spin your opponent's monsters, which we don't have anything to genuinely stop monster effects besides Angel 07, which nobody is summoning, or potentially a dark red discarding a sphere, which is all based off luck. We have Book of Moon, which, as Terramaster already mentioned, is the best staple of the format and why Charging Gaia is such a good monster to have access to. Soul Exchange is great to go along with his Monarchs, especially since he's running 4. And that's something I also want to mention here. He's not only running 3, he's running an extra one here, which is once again upping the odds of him actually hitting the ability to conflict, steal, and sack off his opponent's monster here. It's going to actually bring it above a 50% chance while going second, and probably above 50% chance while going first. I don't have that calc in my head. I don't play conflict. Dust is great for back row, which is going to help support his whole OTK, and Zoma is good for opposing conflict players, especially since Jinzo isn't the best Monarch going into this format, or not necessarily the best, but not the most prevalent, at least at the moment.
Right. I mean, think about what he's doing here with every single card. The 6 protection cards, 3 Book of Moon, 3 Sphere Karibo, are just that. They're protection in case you can't OTK, then your deck can still play on, or if your opponent is also the mirror and they try to OTK you first, you've got the protection until you can make your OTK play. And then it's like you said, he's increasing his odds of having that Monarch. He's increasing the odds of OTK from what the deck used to be, which are only 3 Monarchs optimally. And he can do that because of the Soul Exchange. Because the Soul Exchange gives him an additional option to tribute the monster, right? And then you go to the Dust Tornadoes. Why does he have that? It gives him a total of 5 back row hate. Again, that's the more back row you get rid of, the more likely you are to OTK. What is Zoma? Zoma is more aggression. If you remember what conflict was like before Jinzo, I don't think many people played that, but I did a lot. So before pre-Jinzo, Zoma was extremely important to conflict because you would have to use either Gap or Hades, and then Zoma would be the perfect second or sometimes even third monster to really push for that OTK. So, I mean, anything else you want to say about conflict OTK?
Yes, actually, there's one more huge thing that I want to mention, and that is this is something that Terramaster is very, very huge on. I want you guys to add up the attack points of any Monarch's attack points plus any normal summonable monster's attack points. This includes Zoma, does not include Sphere Karibo.
Yes.
It's always going to be 4,000 plus. He is not playing a single Monarch that hits less than that 2,400 gap, because he has a 1,600 in Breaker, and 16 plus 24 is exactly 4,000, and everything else equates to more than 4,000. So he's always giving himself the option of that OTK.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, that's the optimal way to play the deck, is 2 of your monsters. A normal summon plus a Monarch should add up to 4,000, exactly what you said. And the point about Sphere Karibo I want to mention, now this will go kind of into more the deck building route, is when you're looking at your ratios, Sphere Karibo is not a monster. Sphere Karibo is a trap. It's called a hand trap, and that means that you should consider a trap. So when you look at these ratios, Dueling Book is lying to you. You've got 10 monsters, 7 traps, and 4 spells. So that's how you should consider it. If anything, you could consider the Zoma a special summonable monster. So maybe you've got 12 monsters, but now I'm just getting confusing, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah, exactly. But going back to the whole point of this video, as you guys can see, Paulo did a fantastic job of recognizing his win condition, playing the better build of Monarchs, and because of that, look at him right here, first place and a nice little Battle City box shipped off his way from Tetra.
That's right. He got an entire free Battle City box just because he understood his win condition and built his deck accordingly, and he probably played really well too because he's a really good player. So that comes in too, but that's not why we're here. We're not. If you want to look at the plays, then you got to watch the replays. But we're here about the deck building. All right.
Exactly.
Now we're actually going to go in tier list order to some degree. We're not going to do another conflict deck since this is the better way to play conflict. So we're going to go you actually have a video up on your channel in the description below which has a preliminary tier list for the Battle City box format, the video I was in. So check that out, and we're actually going to go to a deck that is also pretty high up on the tier list. I won't spoil exactly where, but that is Unions. So this is again a Union deck that I believe was top 4 in the Speed Duel League Extravaganza.
Yep, or the Speed Duel League series.
Yeah, the one day live big $500 Speed Duel League tournament. I don't know why I keep thinking of it as an extravaganza. It's just maybe I just really like the word extravaganza. Anyway, my choice of vocabulary aside, yeah. So I mean, pretty much this is still a very simplistic core of a deck to understand. Think of it as you want 2 of each at bare minimum of X, Y, and Z, and you want 3 Union Hanger and 3 Union Scramble. After that, it's just a matter of, okay, how do you want to play with the ratios? What do you have that you think should be your best staples? And how are you going to use additional cards that synergize with your deck? So that's the Foolish Burial. The rest of it is literally just ratio adjustment, which he added 1 Z metal tank, and I completely understand that because I have dueled you, actually, and I have drawn 2 Z metal tanks more times than I can care to remember. So having a 3rd Z metal tank is obviously right, and I'm mad at myself for not thinking of that until I saw Shrink's list.
Yeah.
So that's...
But
yeah.
Before we get too far into this discussion, Terramaster, what kind of deck type is this?
Oh, that's right. So Conflict was an aggressive deck. Now this is not an aggressive deck, obviously, because your skill says you can't do damage, as you can see, put it up on the screen right now, on the same turn that you use the skill. So this deck won't OTK because it was specifically designed with that drawback. However, this deck tries to win a turn or 2 after it uses the skill and clears your field, which makes it a mid-game deck, commonly known in card game jargon as a mid-range deck. It's a deck that can play a control style, will control you early on, and then it will try to win the game in the mid game with a big push right there. So that's exactly what Unions does. You get your setup, you get your field clearing play, and you may not do damage that turn. But then next turn is when you either with Scramble or with the XYZ-dragon cannon you use to make that field clearing push, you go ahead and make the damage push as well.
Yep.
Did I cover everything?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. Just like you said, you're going to have earlier on, you're going to set up yourself for that big XYZ play. You're going to take advantage of XYZ to take control of the board and then follow up with big damage pushes in an eventual game.
Yeah, one point I want to make is mid-range decks are probably the most versatile, generally speaking, because I actually did get an OTK because I got like the perfect hand in one of the rounds of that same Speed Duel League series tournament in one game. But so when they get the right hand, they do have the chance to OTK on like an early like turn 2 or 3. But that's not what they usually do. They can also play a late game control style. Because you have 3 Union Scramble, the deck is very, very capable of winning the game on like turn 10 or even turn 12. Sometimes even later than that. Like you can have 2 cards left in your deck and you can win off your 3rd Scramble. So it's very versatile. Yes, typically it wants to win in the mid game, like a few turns in, but it can really do anything. So mid-range decks are the most versatile, but they're not as good at aggro and OTK, obviously, as a real aggro deck, and they're not as good at the late game control as a real control deck.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have their like huge specialty where they're control based or aggro based, but they can play early, mid, and late game constantly. They're not running out of their resources. They can keep on grinding versus their opponent, which is where this deck shines.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this deck is actually the perfect time to bring up side decks because you talk about recognizing your weakness. And I think Shrink does a great job of that, looking at his side deck, right? So obviously we know, and I think everyone watching this video who's played in the format knows that everyone's siding Lost Wind. I mean, if you're not siding Lost Wind, you're not siding anything, probably. So Shrink knew this, obviously, so he counter-sided. So he knows his weakness, which is that someone's going to side in Lost Wind in game 2. So he is counter-sighting Dust Tornado, 3 copies of it, to get rid of that Lost Wind before it can cut one of his monsters' attack points in half and negate its effect. So that's one way to address a weakness. Another way is obviously if he just wanted to main deck Dust Tornado or some other form of back row hate, that's an option too. But obviously Shrink didn't think that was the right way to go, since Lost Wind is not a concern in game 1, it's only something to worry about in games 2 and 3. So
yeah, exactly. No, fantastic job going for the whole recognizing your weakness thing, and overall the deck build is genuinely fantastic. Huge props to Shrink. There's a reason he did so well.
Yep. And I think that's all we have to say about unions. Now we've done aggro, we've done mid-range. Let's move on to the third main type of deck, and this is actually Curseof Original, kind of. You were the first person to actually to get me into this deck, so go ahead and start talking about these magnets.
Yes, so the Magnet Warrior is our third type of deck that we're going to talk about here, that being the control deck. A lot of people early on were going for a more aggro, Valkyrion summon sort of strategy for the deck, but huge shout out to Arlequint, I think the only person who actually won an event with Magnet so far, as he was the first person to show me and Terra Master as well that, hey, this deck is not a aggro deck. This is a control deck. You're supposed to focus on magnetic field and using your Magnet Warriors to control the field and go for little pokes. And as you can see by the deck list right in front of you here, with that in mind, we run 6 copies of Magnetic Field. This is our necessary win condition. You need to see that card as often as you can, so you have to max out on that. Along with that, we run 7 copies of the Magnet Warriors themselves with 3 Delta, 3 Beta, and the 1 Gamma to obviously get access into the Magnet Warriors as often as possible. We also run the 1 Valk because it can come in handy a lot, especially when you're constantly flooding your graveyard. But overall, the main strategy here is those 7 magnets and those 6 magnetic fields to swarm the board with your little magnets and just bounce your opponent's monsters. You're controlling the board state here. You're not letting your opponent amass board presence, which means they shouldn't be able to OTK or kill you off fast. Well, you have a huge board of your little boys, and you're just going to slowly poke your opponent to death. This is going to be a deck that does not OTK by any stretch of the imagination. It is going to take multiple turns, but your opponent is never going to be able to push for game or push for their own OTK because you're doing your whole control strategy here.
Yeah, I mean, this deck is a classic example of, it's a deck that will slowly gain a resource advantage over your opponent. A game I played for this January's Speed Duel League Win-A-Box, the card economy ended up at 11-2 because that's how dominant the deck can be once it gets rolling with its control. So think about that. I had 11 cards. My opponent had 2 when the game ended.
Yeah.
So think about how it went from 4-4 to 11-2. That's how good this deck can be, and that's how it's supposed to work when you get when you go off. Which to do that, all you need is 1 field spell and 1 magnet. Really, is to get popping. And with 7 and 6, like Curseof said, he ran the calcs on this. It gives you pretty good odds. What are those odds?
You always have over an 80% chance to open the combo. Whether going first or second, you are always over 80%.
Right, yeah. So it's over an 80% chance you can get your control strat going. And like I already said, once it gets going, it is very, very hard to stop. Like, your opponent has to have like the perfect like disruption for your play, and then they have to like OTK you without you having any protection for that OTK, and that's like very unlikely. Like, it's happened, sure, but the point is 80%, right? Not you're never gonna get to.
And then if Terra Master can bring up the skill card here on the screen for all of you watching at home, you'll also see that even if your opponent can deal with 2 magnets on your very first turn, potentially with like a conflict play, for example, you're guaranteed to have another magnet in hand for your next turn to follow up. So if they don't deal with your field spell, they can't actually deal with your strategy.
Exactly. And that's why the field spell is so important, and that's why you absolutely must have 3 metaverse. So yeah, you talked about the core of the deck. And then as far as this deck goes, the staples are really what you want. So if you Curseof's channel, once again, he's got a deck profile of a deck he got top 4 with, and I just took that deck and based off of my experience and matchups I've lost to, which was like things like trap monsters and got conflict OTK'd a couple times, and then I had an annoying problem where Breaker was summoned on turn 1 by my opponent and I was going second, and I didn't know how to get rid of the Breaker, and I couldn't play the field spell because the Breaker would just pop it, and then my opponent would sort of ruin me, and I didn't have a second field spell. So based off of that, I was like, maybe Book of Moon is good. So I took your deck list, I removed 2 spheres and added 2 Book of Moon. Now again, there's arguments to be made on that both ways. There's no like set optimized staple collection for this deck just yet, but as far as the weaknesses goes, what are the actual weaknesses of this deck?
Well, as you just mentioned, a huge weakness of the deck is Breaker, as Breaker has the ability to pop your magnetic field, which basically kills your deck's entire strategy. So our ways to stop that, obviously, is our Floodgate Trap Holes and our Book of Moon, just setting your opponent's Breakers and stopping them from using their effects. Spellproof Armor is another huge issue because we can't hit their monsters with our magnetic field, which is why we have Floodgate and Sphere Creeper to stop that, and our entire side deck, minus the 2 Lost Winds, are set up to help deal with that spellproof with our Conflict, Kaiser Glider there. And then we just have issues in things like if someone's playing a Conflict Spell Canceller list, which is more rare, but once again you'll side into your Kaiser Conflict. Just, if they can stop your spell cards, we're in a really, really bad scenario. So you just want to keep yourself, you want to have access into your whole board control as often as possible. So you want to be able to deal with Spell Canceller or just deal with all their monsters, hopefully, if it's a spellproof deck.
I'm going to bring this up because I feel like I have to. If somebody's playing Spell Canceller Conflict, that means they're probably not adding up to 4,000 damage, which means they're playing non-aggro Conflict, which is why if you just side into the Kaiser Glider Conflict, you side into better Conflict, and then you just
yes,
you do bad Conflict with good Conflict. Then there you go. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And same thing with Spellproof. Spellproof, which actually is a spoiler for maybe in like 2 minutes or 5 minutes from now, we'll get to it. And their biggest weakness is good Conflict. So yeah, you can deal with Spellproof that way too. So really, your core is your magnetic field. Your weakness is anything that stops your magnetic field or is unaffected by it. So this is how you deal with that. There's not really much else to say, is there?
Yeah, no, I think that basically covers it.
Okay, and now we're gonna go to our last kind of deck, which is kind of a branch on the aggro tree, and that is Beatdown. So it doesn't OTK, but this deck tries to put pressure on your opponent every turn, as much pressure as possible, and tries to back them into a corner and tries to really like gain advantage by destroying the monsters in battle and by dealing big damage to their life points. Did I get that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not a OTK based strategy like the Conflict. It doesn't make that big quick push. It just summons big monsters like your Ally of Justice Colossus, takes advantage of its spell immunity, and just keeps on pushing for big damage.
Right. So one thing with this deck, and with Spellproof specifically, getting a little specific here, is your monsters will be immune to the biggest staple of the format. And you can see there's 3 of them in this. This is actually your list, so this is your top 8 list from the Speed Duel League series. And yeah, so like you can see there's 3 Book of Moon in this deck as well. So 3 Book of Moon is almost everywhere. And your monsters being immune to 3 of your opponent's protection cards is just such a big advantage right away, that it, combined with you being able to summon a beater this big, 2300, it gives you a big advantage. Now, what's the core of this deck, Curseof?
Well, like I just said, you really want to focus on that beatdown strategy. You really, really want to take advantage of the fact that you have a 2300 that is immune to spells, and thus we must run not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 copies of the Ally of Justice Colossus. You have to run the 3 summoners are along with the 3 Colossus because you have to have access to it as often as you can because it is the deck's core strategy. To follow along with that, we also have a couple Zomas and Machina Gear Frame to also help with the whole beatdown thing here. And then we just have, Jinzo, because if you can also shut down their traps and not be affected by their spells, your beatdown strategy is almost guaranteed for the entirety of the match at that point. So if you can get Jinzo on the field, your opponent basically just loses half the time. So yeah, you got to max out on your Jinzos there and also have some good ways to summon them like Soul Exchange, sacking Zoma, and obviously the 1 Psychic Shockwave.
Yeah, I just want to say about Psychic Shockwave is I saw you resolve it once, and that was game over right there. If you resolve Psychic Shockwave, especially on your turn, because that's when they're most likely to activate a trap.
Yeah.
When you'll still be able to attack with that Jinzo on this very turn that you've summoned it, that should be an auto win, maybe immediately, because you've negated their trap. You've given yourself a 2400 beater that negates all other traps. It's already immune to spells, so that's usually game.
Yeah, I literally did only resolve the Psychic Shockwave once throughout the entirety of the tournament. But just that one resolving was worth the entirety of the trap card because like Terra Master said, if you ever do resolve it, you basically just auto win from there.
Yeah, and the rest of the deck is just, you got your staples, which is Book of Moon, and then you chose to tech the Shrink and the Eliminating Bleed. But again, those 2 slots I think are the free slots in the deck. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely say that Shrink and Eliminating the League are the 2 cards that can definitely be swapped out here. The reason I opted for the ones that I did was simply because the decks, recognizing the deck's main weakness, it's monsters that are bigger than it, like for example XYZs or Moth. If they can get it on the field, they pose a huge threat to the deck, so you want to be able to deal with those.
Yeah, well said. And now, what about the weaknesses of this deck?
Yeah, speaking of weaknesses, speaking of XYZs, look at the side deck. We have 2 copies of Lost Wind here, which is very, very standard. We have the Core Destroyer here, as it fits perfectly with the spellproof strategy, as it is a machine, and it always guarantees kills their fusions, as if it battles a light monster, you just go ahead and pop it. It doesn't work if they have an equip, but just don't swing your Core Destroyer into an equip. Plus, your Colossus is bigger than their primary equip, which is Z on Y. So, huge card to have there. Then you have the 2 Cosmic Cyclones, which are also really, really big versus the whole XYZ strategy, as you can banish their equip, so it's not in graveyard for the whole skill summon, and you can also pop their hanger so they don't get all the searches and stuff. And then the 1 equip card is actually for the mirror, as in the mirror, whoever summons Jinzo first just wins. So, yeah.
Yeah, mirror usually Jinzo just wins. Now, I will say, we mentioned earlier that this deck doesn't do great against aggressive conflict, since you can get OTK'd and you cannot run Sphere Kuriboh because of Spellproof Armor's restriction. And that's why it's important to have the 3 Book of Moons in case they're doing Jinzo, and then Eliminating the League and Shrink are excellent techs in case they're having something like Kaiser Glider. Both of those can answer that, and Zoma can be an answer to that as well, because if they've used Inner Conflict, that means they can no longer use their Monarch to kill Zoma, or else they just lose.
Oh yeah, so yeah, going on that whole topic there, Zoma and Book are the 2 biggest cards for the whole conflict OTK issue, as Zoma can just kill them off of their conflict play because they've half their life points, and you can swing Zoma into their Monarch. And Book of Moon has the ability to set their Monarch, which guarantees that your Soul Exchange plus either Jinzo or Colossus will resolve. Because the whole thing there is, if you activate Soul Exchange and on resolution they book it, then Soul Exchange is a lingering effect, they set their monster, it's gone. But if you've already set their monster, they can't set it again and get rid of your lingering effects. You're guaranteed to resolve Soul Exchange.
Yep, exactly. So, I don't think there's anything else you want to say about this deck, or are we ready to summarize?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else here, so I think we go right back through the decks one at a time, and
Right. All right. So in summary, there's 4 types of basic deck types that we've presented to you here, and they all have their individual win conditions. So going back to the conflict deck, you've got a aggressive OTK deck whose win condition is obviously find the opportunity to OTK and then OTK. It can be as soon as the second turn of the game that you have, or it can be even a few turns after that. You find your opportunity and you go for that 4,000 damage, and if that fails, obviously the deck can still play on because it's got powerful monsters and cards in general.
exactly. So you play multiple of your monarchs, and then you play monsters that add up to 4,000 plus damage. That is your win con. You have to focus around that.
Yeah, don't play Apprentice. Long story short. Second up, we've got mid-range, and mid-range, the win condition is to control early on, and then once you see the opportunity to apply pressure and try to start pushing damage in, then you push as much damage in as possible, but you obviously have to set up first and create that opportunity. So it's more of you play the beginning of the game kind of planning for your big push, and then you make your big push when you see the chance to do so.
Exactly. You're just creating the core of your deck. Your whole deck is planned around a mid-game, big play, big push, and a very slow early game, but you also usually have a late game play. For example, here it would be Scramble.
Yep. So Jack of all trades deck, where the win condition is usually to try to gain control early on and then go in aggressive after that point. And then you can also have recovery options in the late game if that's what it comes down to.
Then third here we have our control strategy, which is the Magnet Warrior deck. Obviously it's focused around sort of a mid-game win condition here as well. Early game you're just going to, and throughout the entirety of the game, you're going to keep your opponent off any board presence or whatever you're trying to control, and you're just going to slowly poke them, whittle them down until eventually you're just able to game them with that final hit here.
Yeah, and not only that, you were also trying to, and you will succeed if you play right and if you draw right, obviously, to win the resource battle. You will every turn deplete their resources. Like when they Book of Moon a magnet, that's like my favorite thing. I'm like, okay, go neg one. So they will continuously deplete their resources while you, thanks to your beautiful magnetic field's ability to special summon, constantly gain your resources back.
Exactly. Small pokes, out-resource them, and just control the game.
Yeah, I think me and you personally love this playstyle the most, which is why I think this is our favorite deck of the format so far.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So if you want a deck that me and Curseof really have fun playing, then it's Magnet Warriors. Alright, and finally we have the Beat Down strat. What does that entail?
This one is literally just big monsters, and you're just hitting your opponent for big damage and just taking the advantage of the fact that, hey, I have a 2300 beat stick and you don't.
Yes, so it's pressure in terms of you are killing their monsters and lowering their life points quickly, and you could kill them in 2 hits if they allow you to hit twice with one of your big beaters. And it's also pressure in terms of you have a big monster, which is a Colossus, or sometimes a Jinzo, which is immune to spells. And if your opponent does not have an answer to it, they're going to lose. So that's kind of 2 kinds of pressure, right? Where you have exactly. Either like a big sort of semi-boss monster, or Jinzo I guess is a boss monster with spellproof, and you are forcing your opponent to have an out. And then it's pressure obviously in terms of that. Because it's a big beater, you're constantly attacking them, and they don't really have a way to answer it like by battle.
Yeah, a lot of the time, if you get 2 monsters on your field with this deck, you're basically just saying, hey, I've won.
Right, yeah. If they let you keep your first monster and then summon a second one, now they can't even conflict OTK you anymore. So, like, they've lost their opportunity to get their win con, and you are so close to yours that I think you pretty much got it locked in at that point, like you said. So, yep. So those are the 4 deck types, and obviously a lot of different decks can apply to those, but that's just something to kind of get a basic explanation of it and also give examples. And we try to use what we think are the 4 best decks of the Battle City Box format. So as to help like really understand what each deck is supposed to do. And unless you've got any closing thoughts, I think we're about wrapped up.
Yeah, TLDR guys, max out on your win conditions and you'll do better in tournaments.
Yeah. Another quick TLDR for deck building that we didn't say when we went through each one of those. Understand your core of your deck. So once you understand the type of deck and the win condition it is, you'll know what the deck's core is supposed to be. And then you can also identify the weaknesses based off of that. And you'll understand that what staples and what synergy cards are necessary to go with it and what the side deck should be. So that being said, I hope this was a good video and a learning experience for all you guys. And if there's anything that we missed and you want us to talk about, if there's a deck type or an example that you really want to know more about, I can try to talk more about that in a later video, so go ahead and let me know. But I think that's all we've got. Like I said, Curseof's YouTube is in the description below. Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy's Discord is always in the description below. And please consider liking, subscribing, all that good stuff. Terra Master and Curseof out.